But for us, because Chris and his wife have been making beer for almost 15 years now, they have been around the block and they know what they're doing. So all we did was take recipes that they've won awards for and that we all knew were great beers and scaled them up to be made on a commercial level. One good example is our IPA. It's the most popular beer we make, and a lot of IPAs right now are really popular. But we actually took their recipe and we scaled it up, and we had to modify the commercial brewery we have to actually deal with whole leaf hops. And so we use a hop back process to make it. And the commercial breweries aren't really made to do that. Pisgah's the only one I can think of that does it. They just sort of suck it up and throw all the whole leaf hops in the kettle, and they get stuck and
clean it up.
They gotta clean it and keep it going and keep it from clogging. But that's not really the way the systems are made. They're made to use pelletized hops, and so that's one thing we've done. I would say too that just having the brand name, people, my friends especially, before we ever really even had a brewery set up, they would ask me, well, hey, what's the name of the brewery? This is back in Charleston. I would say, oh, well, it's the Nantahala Brewing Company, and they just laughed and kind of hit me on the shoulder and say, yeah, right, man. That brewery already exists. I've had their beer before. You start percolating this water through just like a French press, just like making coffee. And so as that goes through, we're pulling all of the sugar out of the grain. It also picks up flavor and color as well. So if we're using a roasted, really roasted grain, that's how you end up with a darker beer like a stout. And so once we have gotten enough of that sugar out, we'll transfer it over to the kettle. And that's where Chris would go and add things like hops for making an IPA. So as that happens, it starts to boil. We actually bring it up to over 200 degrees, and it's just like a giant cauldron. Just brew it. Every so often, depending on what we're making, he might add something else to it. It goes for about 90 minutes, and once that's done, we actually transfer it through the cold plate. So this is one here, and really lucky. The water that comes into this building, since the building was built in the 1940s, it's still one of the oldest standing buildings in the Bryson City. And so the water comes straight out of the deep creek and comes straight to the building. So the water temperature today, probably in the 40s coming in the building. So that's running in the opposite direction as the beer coming out of the kettle. And so it just exchanges the heat. That hot water is right back into here. Being a small microbrewery, we don't filter our beer, we don't pasteurize it. So we take it out of the fermentation tank, ideally within 2 weeks if it's done fermenting. We move it into here. Before we do that, Chris pulls the yeast off of the bottom of the conical. There's still residual yeast left over. So we move it into this tank and let it sit for a week or so. And all of that yeast will sort of drop out of the beer. It's a chemical process that molecules sort of combine and drop out to the bottom because they weigh more than the beer does. And once that's done, then the beer will clarify, and so you'll end up with a really clear beer like you would expect to find instead of one that's really cloudy. And then we can go ahead and keg it and start drinking it. It also will start to carbonate in here. Carbonation occurs when the beer itself starts to get really cold. So if you start to drink, say, a warm beer, you may end up losing the carbonation a lot faster because that CO2 is leaving the beer. And just ideally, carbon dioxide needs to be infused into the beer at a much lower temperature.